The chair scraped back so hard it nearly tipped. My brother's face had gone the color of old chalk, and across the mahogany table, my mother had pressed both hands flat against the surface like she needed something solid to hold on to. The attorney cleared his throat. Nobody looked at me. Then my father did. And that was when I understood that everything was about to change. But I should start from the beginning. Because none of this makes sense without the 11 years before it. I grew up in Harlan, Kentucky. Not the kind of town people write songs about the way they mean it. The kind people write songs about because leaving is the only thing worth doing. My grandmother's house sat at the end of Cutter Road, white clapboard siding, a tire swing in the front yard that stayed up longer than it should have, a kitchen that always smelled like cornbread and something simmering on the back burner. Gran was the steadiest thing in my life from the time I could walk. My parents were not unkind people. I want to be clear about that. My father worked 31 years at the county road department. My mother raised 3 children and kept a garden and brought casseroles to funerals. They were good people in the way that people can be good and still not understand you at all. My older brother had a degree in business from Morehead State. My younger sister married a dentist at 24 and lived in a 4-bedroom house in Lexington with a front porch that looked like something out of a catalog. And then there was me. I left for college at 17 and didn't finish. That was the first thing they couldn't forgive. I'd been 2 years into a biology degree when I made a decision that I was not allowed to explain to them. Not then. Not for a long time after. All they knew was that I had dropped out, moved somewhere that wasn't home, and called on holidays with thin excuses for why I couldn't visit. Ellie never did have direction, I heard my mother say once, at Thanksgiving, the year I was 23. She wasn't trying to be cruel. She just thought I was in the other room. I was standing right behind her. I didn't correct her. I went back to the table, ate the sweet potato casserole, and said nothing. That was something I had gotten very good at by then. Gran never asked me to explain myself. That was the thing about her. She would look at me across the kitchen table with those gray eyes that had seen 78 years of this world, and she would say, "You doing what you're supposed to be doing?" And I would say, "Yes, ma'am." And she would nod once and pour me another cup of coffee like that settled it. She died in February, on a Tuesday, in the same house where she'd been born. My mother called me, and I drove 14 hours straight through because I couldn't get on a plane that week. I didn't explain that either. The funeral was the first time I'd seen my whole family in 3 years. My brother shook my hand like I was an acquaintance. My sister hugged me and then immediately started talking about the drive down from Lexington, how long it had taken, how tired her kids were. My father stood at Gran's graveside and cried in the quiet way that men of his generation cried, almost without movement, just the jaw working. I stood beside him and held his arm and didn't say much. After, at the house, while everyone was eating and talking, he found me on the back porch. "You look tired," he said. "I'm okay." He was quiet for a while. The yard looked the same as it always had. The tire swing was finally down, just the rope left, fraying where it met the branch. "Your grandmother talked about you all the time," he said. I never really understood what she saw. He didn't say it to hurt me. I knew that. But it landed anyway, the way those things do, soft and heavy at the same time. I nodded. I went inside and helped wash dishes and drove back the next morning before anyone else was up. The letter from the attorney came 6 weeks later. Gran's estate was to be settled in April. All family members were requested to attend in person at the offices of Hargrove and Associates in Harlan. I arranged to be there. That cost me something I also couldn't explain. I arrived 10 minutes early. The waiting room had wood paneling and a print of a covered bridge on the wall and magazines from 3 months ago. My brother was already there, sitting with his arms crossed, wearing the expression he'd been perfecting since childhood, the one that said he had already calculated everyone's worth in the room and found the numbers disappointing. My mother and father came in together. My mother hugged me briefly and said I looked thin. My father nodded. My sister arrived last, slightly breathless, apologizing to the room. We settled around the table. Mr. Hargrove was a careful man in his late 60s, the kind who measured every word before he spent it. He had a folder in front of him and a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee going cold at his elbow. "I appreciate everyone making the trip," he said. Margaret was very specific about her wishes, and she asked that I read the relevant portions of the document aloud before we discussed distribution. My brother leaned forward slightly. He'd driven down from Cincinnati, He had opinions about the property, about what should be sold and what it would fetch, and he'd already shared them with me in a text message 3 days prior. The house on Cutter Road was worth something now. The county had grown. He'd used the word pragmatic twice. Mr. Hargrove began to read. The truck, the garden equipment, the furniture, those were divided evenly. There was a small savings account, split 4 ways. And then he reached the part about the house. The property located at 4 Cutter Road, including the structure, the land, and all contents therein, I leave entirely to my granddaughter, Eleanor Ann Carson. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something hits them. Then my brother's chair scraped back. That can't be right. He wasn't yelling. He was using the voice that was worse than yelling, low and certain. The voice that had talked me out of the front seat on car trips when we were children because he'd already decided it was his. There must be a previous version. Or she didn't understand what she was signing. Your grandmother was of entirely sound mind, Mr. Hargrove said, without any particular emotion. Ellie hasn't even been here. My brother gestured at me like I was evidence of something. She missed Christmas 3 years running. She missed the surgery when Dad had his knee done. She doesn't even nobody knows what she does. She never tells anyone anything. She just disappears and then shows up when there's something to collect. My mother had gone very still. My father was looking at the table. Marcus, my sister said quietly. No. He shook his head. Someone needs to say it. Gran was lonely. She was an old woman, and she was lonely. And Ellie was probably the only one who called her back, and so she got attached. That's not a basis for... I'd ask you to let me finish reading, Mr. Hargrove said. My brother sat down. The attorney looked at his paper. Margaret asked me to include a personal note to be read at this meeting. She was quite insistent. He unfolded a separate sheet, handwritten on cream paper in Gran's careful cursive. To my family, you are good people, and I have loved you without reservation. But I have watched for many years as you misunderstood one among you, and I could not correct it because it was not mine to correct. Ellie has sacrificed things most people will never be asked to sacrifice. She has done it quietly and without complaint and without expecting any of you to understand. I understood. I am asking you to trust that. The house goes to her because she is the one who will know what to do with it. She always has. My mother's hand had come up to her mouth. My brother stared at the far wall. His jaw was working. The door to the conference room opened. I had known he was in town. He'd told me when I called to arrange the time off. I had not expected him to come to the office. I had told him it wasn't necessary. He came anyway. Colonel Dennis Hayes was 61 years old, had served 34 years in the United States Army, and walked into a room the way a weather front does. You felt it before you saw it. He was in civilian clothes, but it didn't matter. Some things don't wash off. He looked at me first. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. I'm fine. He nodded once and looked at Mr. Hargrove. I apologize for interrupting. I'm an old friend of the family. He wasn't, of course, but he sat down in the empty chair along the wall, folded his hands, and waited. My brother found his voice first. Who are you? Dennis Hayes. I worked with Ellie for 8 years. Doing what, exactly? My brother's tone carried the implication that whatever I had been doing, it likely wasn't much. Colonel Hayes looked at him for a moment with the specific patience of someone who has sat across from difficult situations and simply waited for them to resolve themselves. That's mostly still classified, he said. The silence that followed was a particular kind, the kind that rearranges things. My father looked up from the table for the first time in several minutes. He looked at me, really looked at me, in a way he hadn't since I was a girl doing math homework at the kitchen counter, and he'd come and stood behind my chair for a while without saying anything. Ellie, he said. His voice was different, careful. What did you do? I looked at my hands on the table. The scar on my left palm. The one I'd gotten in a place I still couldn't name in a year I still couldn't disclose. I'd told my mother it was from a cooking accident. She'd believed me because it was easier. I can tell you some of it now, I said. Most of it is still there are things I signed. Things I can't. Try, he said. So I did. I had been recruited at 19 by a woman who sat next to me in the university library and asked me, without any preamble, whether I had ever considered government work. I had thought she was selling something. She was not selling anything. I had a particular set of abilities that were rare enough to be useful. Languages had always come easily to me. I had 3 by high school, acquired the way some people acquire hobbies. I was calm under conditions that rattled most people. I was good at being overlooked, which I'd spent a childhood accidentally practicing. And I had a biology background that could be shaped into something with the right training. The training took 2 years. What followed took everything else. I told them the parts I could. The years of work I wasn't allowed to name. The places I wasn't allowed to say out loud, even now. The reason I had missed my father's surgery that I had been in a hospital myself that week, in a different country, under a different name, a fact that had frightened me more than I ever let show. The 3 Christmases, the holidays, the calls I made from satellite phones in cold places because I needed to hear someone's voice, and it was usually Gran who answered because she was always up. She knew? My mother asked. Not the details. She knew I was serving. She said she'd figured it out the second year, from some things I'd said without meaning to. She never told anyone. My mother was crying quietly, without any dramatics, just tears sliding down her face while she sat very straight. My brother had not moved in a long time. He was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. I didn't have a word for it immediately. It took me a moment to recognize it as shame. I retired 8 months ago, I said. Medical discharge. Nothing serious now. But they'd been asking me to do less field work for a while, and I was tired. That last word came out smaller than the others. I hadn't meant to say it that way. I was ready to be somewhere that knew my real name. Colonel Hayes had not spoken since his introduction. He spoke now. He spoke for about 4 minutes, without notes, in the flat and precise way of a man who chose every word on purpose. He talked about the specific nature of the work I had done. He didn't give locations or operations. He talked about the nature of the sacrifice involved in that kind of service, the particular loneliness of it, the way it required people to be misunderstood because the alternative was dangerous, the way the people who did it well were often the least visible. When he finished, the room was very quiet. My brother stood up. He didn't look at the table or the attorney or our parents. He looked at me. I said things just now, he said. I've said things over the years. I didn't, he stopped. He was not a man who apologized easily. I'd watched him not apologize for things our entire childhood. He pressed his hands to the back of the chair in front of him. I'm sorry, Ellie. I didn't know what I was talking about. There are moments in life that you don't know how to receive because you've been waiting for them so long they've stopped feeling real. This was one of those. I looked at my brother at his face, which was our father's face, which was the same face I'd grown up beside for 18 years, and I felt something shift sideways in my chest. Not dramatically, just a small release, like a door that had been stuck finally swinging open. You didn't know, I said. That was the point. My mother left her chair. She crossed the room and put her arms around me and held on longer than she had at Gran's funeral, longer than she had when I left for college, longer than I could remember being held by her since I was small. She smelled like the same soap she'd always used. Some things are the same across all the years and all the distance. I'm so sorry, she said, into my hair. I'm so sorry we didn't. Mom, I held her back. It's okay. It wasn't entirely okay. I want to be honest about that. There were years in there that were not okay. Years of sitting in barracks and tents and borrowed rooms in cities with unpronounceable names, and feeling the specific weight of being invisible to the people who were supposed to know you best. Those years don't disappear because of one afternoon around a mahogany table, but they become something different. Something you can carry differently. My father came around the table. He put his hand on my shoulder, briefly, the way he had when I was little and came home from something that had gone wrong. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. The house, I said, to the room, after a while. I'm not going to fight anyone about it. I was going to fix it up. There's a lot of deferred maintenance. I was going to stay there for a while. We'll help, my sister said. It was the first full sentence she'd said in an hour. She looked young and a little shaken and entirely sincere. My brother nodded. He was still standing at the back of the room, but he looked lighter than he had when we'd arrived. Something had gone out of him. The certainty, maybe. The closed arithmetic he'd been doing since childhood. Mr. Hargrove had sat through all of this with the careful stillness of a man who had been a family attorney for 40 years and had seen most of the things that could happen in a room like this. He gathered his papers quietly. I'll give you all a few minutes, he said, and left. Colonel Hayes stood to leave and I walked him to the door. You didn't have to come, I said. I was in Lexington anyway. He said it the way he always said things he'd gone out of his way to do, as though the effort had been incidental. I had learned not to argue with it. "Thank you," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "You did the hard part for 11 years. This was nothing." He nodded once. The way he did that small, complete nod that meant the conversation was finished, and everything necessary had been said, and walked out through the front office and into the April afternoon. It took us 3 weekends and 12 trips to the hardware store to get the porch railing right. My brother drove down from Cincinnati both weekends in May, showed up in work clothes. He just worked. We talked while we worked, the way we hadn't talked since we were kids, sharing a room and the house was asleep and it felt safe to say things. He told me he'd felt left behind. That was the word he used, and it surprised me. I had always assumed he was the one who'd gotten everything right, who'd gotten the life that was supposed to happen. He said it looked different from where he was standing. He said watching me get Gran's house had cracked something open that he hadn't let himself look at in a long time. I told him I understood that more than he knew. My mother came one Sunday in June with a casserole dish and a box of Gran's kitchen things that she'd been keeping in her own house since the funeral: the mixing bowls, the good cast iron pan, the little tin recipe box with cards in Gran's handwriting. She set them all on the kitchen counter and looked around the room for a while without saying anything. "I used to sit right there," she finally said, pointing to the chair at the end of the table. "When I was first married, before you were born, I'd come over here and sit and she'd tell me things." She paused. She was the steadiest person I ever knew. "Yes," I said. "She was right about you." She turned and looked at me straight on, the way she hadn't in years, maybe ever, with that clear, even look that meant she was saying something she meant all the way down. "She was right about you and I wasn't, and I am going to have to live with that. Mom, you didn't know. I knew enough to know I didn't know. That's what I should have held on to." She shook her head once, a small, decisive motion. "I'm going to do better. That's all I can say." I put the cast iron pan in its place on the stove. The kitchen smelled like the paint I'd been using on the trim, and underneath that, faintly, the way old houses hold on to things, it still smelled like Gran's cornbread. "I know," I said. "Me too. My father came last. That was like him, to wait until the work was mostly done and then arrive without announcement in the early morning before anyone else was up. I heard his truck on the gravel at 7 and found him standing in the backyard looking at the tree line. He had a coffee thermos. He held it out and I took a cup. We stood there a while. The morning was cool and the light was coming in low across the yard, and the old rope from the tire swing was still hanging from the oak, fraying at the end where it had been cut. "I owe you something," he said. "Dad, let me say it." He wasn't looking at me. He was still looking at the tree line. "I spent a lot of years thinking I knew what kind of person you were. And I was wrong. Not just wrong about the facts. Wrong about I didn't try hard enough to find out. I took the version of you that was easiest to see." He paused. "That's not the kind of father I meant to be." I held the coffee cup in both hands. The weight of what he was saying was real, and I didn't want to brush it away with something easy. "I know you didn't mean it," I said. "That doesn't make it less." "No," I said. "It doesn't." We stood there a little longer. A bird was doing something complicated in the oak tree. Somewhere down the road, someone was starting a car. "Your grandmother used to say you were the bravest person she knew," he said. I thought she meant brave in the regular way. Bold, not afraid of things. He turned and looked at me. "I think she meant the other kind. The kind where you keep going even when nobody around you understands what you're doing or why." I looked at my father, at his face that had gotten older since I was a girl doing homework at the kitchen counter, at the gray in his hair and the way he was looking at me, not like a problem he couldn't parse, not like a daughter who had disappointed expectations, but just like a person he was still figuring out and had decided he wanted to keep figuring out. "I didn't leave because I didn't love this family," I said. "I want you to know that. I left because I had something I had to do, and I couldn't take any of you with me." He nodded. His jaw worked the way it had at Gran's graveside. "I know that now," he said. He reached over and gripped my shoulder once, brief and firm, the way he'd done my whole life when words weren't quite enough and he needed a way to say something that didn't have easy language. Then he walked over to where the old rope was hanging and looked at it for a while. "We should put the swing back up," he said. "If you're going to have this place." "Yeah," I said. "I think we should." The house on Cutter Road took most of the summer. The porch, the roof, 2 windows that had warped in their frames and wouldn't close right. the kitchen floor that had developed a soft spot near the pantry door. My brother came more weekends than I expected. My sister brought her kids twice, and the older one figured out how to climb the oak tree and sat up in it for most of an afternoon while the adults worked below. Some evenings I would sit on the back steps after everyone had gone and look at the yard in the long summer dark and think about the years that had brought me here. The places, the cold and the heat and the faces of people I would never be able to talk about. The particular loneliness of doing work that required you to be invisible. And then this yard, this house, this family coming back across the distance I had put between us, coming back with their toolboxes and their casserole dishes and their imperfect apologies and their genuine attempts. Gran had been right. She was usually right. I still couldn't tell them everything. There are things in my history that will never have words in any family conversation, things that belong to the dark part of my life. The part that's sealed away not because I'm ashamed, but because there are people still doing that work, and they deserve the silence I can give them. My family understood that now. Or they understood that they didn't need to understand it. Which is close enough. One evening in late August, my mother called, and we talked for an hour, which was longer than we had talked on the phone in probably 10 years. She told me about her garden, about a book she was reading, about something funny my nephew had said. And at the end, before she hung up, she said, "I'm glad you're home, Ellie." I was sitting on the back steps. The rope was still in the oak tree. We hadn't gotten the new swing up yet. We were going to do it the next time everyone came. Make something of it. Do it together. "Me too," I said, and I meant it all the way down.